These real witch hunts that ended in pure evil will blow you away. These are real events involving real people who lived, suffered, and passed away, and in each case, the ending wasn't justice, it was just pure evil. The Salem witch trials. A scream pierced the cold February air of 1692. 9-year-old Betty Paris lay thrashing in her bed, her cousin Abigail Williams beside her, clawing at her own neck as if unseen hands were retching her. Outside their home in Salem Village, rumors had already begun to spread, whispers of the devil walking amongst them. Now, the Puritans who settled Massachusetts believed the world was a battlefield between God and Satan, and they lived in constant fear of damnation. Now, the smallest misfortunes, such as a ruined crop or a sick cow, could be explained away by witchcraft. But when Betty and Abigail's strange fits began, the village was ready to believe something far darker was at work. The local doctor declared there was no natural cause. That left only one explanation. The girls were victims of witches because, yeah, I mean, it couldn't possibly be anything else, you know. Soon, under pressure, the girls accused 3 women, one being Tituba, the enslaved servant in the Paris household. Another was Sarah Good, a destitute beggar, and Sarah Osborne, a sickly woman who rarely attended church, which at the time was the biggest deal. Now, Tituba's confession shocked the community. She spoke of black dogs, red cats, and a tall man from Boston who promised her freedom if she served him. Whether coerced or fabricated, her words unleashed hysteria. Neighbors accused neighbors, old grudges resurfaced as proof of dark pacts. The trials that followed were a masterclass in paranoia. The court allowed spectral evidence, claims that an accused witch's spirit had appeared to torment someone, even if they were physically somewhere else. One by one, victims fell. Bridget Bishop, the first to be executed, was unalived in June. By September, 19 had been executed. One man named Giles Corey was pressed to his demise under heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea, and at least 5 others had passed away in the squalor of Salem's jails. When the madness finally subsided in 1693, the damage was irreversible. Families were shattered, reputations destroyed, and the courts themselves discredited. Years later, the colony would formally apologize and compensate the victims' descendants, but that could never undo the raw terror that consumed Salem during those fateful months. The Toracre witch trials in 1675 in Sweden. Now, the snow-covered hills of Toracre were silent on the morning of June 1st, 1675, except for the heavy boots of guards escorting 71 prisoners towards a frozen execution ground. They were mothers, all bound, all condemned to perish. Now, Sweden's witch panic, known as Det Stora Översandet, the Great Noise, had been raging for years. The Lutheran Church and the Crown were convinced the devil was recruiting women to his service, taking them to a mythical place called Blackula for satanic feasts and just other crazy stuff. Now, in Toracre, the hysteria began when the local minister, Laurentus Christofori Herenus, claimed 2 children in the parish could identify witches by a secret mark only they could see. Week after week, villagers were called to stand, before the church. The children would walk past them, touching those they claimed were witches. That was all it took to seal a person's fate. Now, the interrogations were brutal. Suspects were threatened with eternal, damnation if they didn't confess. Many broke under the pressure, admitting to flying through the night, meeting the devil, and casting spells. The charges were absolutely absurd, but the confessions, whether forced or imagined, became undeniable proof. On execution day, the condemned were led to a hill outside the village. One by one, they were basically beheaded with an axe, and their bodies then, kind of burned on pyres to prevent their spirits from returning. In a single day, Toracre lost more than 1/5 of its women. It remains the largest mass execution for witchcraft in Sweden's history. A moment when fear and religious, fervor basically turned neighbor against neighbor. neighbor, and the truth just no longer mattered. The Wurzburg witch trials from 1625 to 1631 in Germany. Now picture a city where every day could be your last. That was Worsburg in Germany during one of Europe's worst witch hunts ever. Now the early 17th century was a time of war, famine, and a lot of disease. In Wurzburg, Prince Bishop Philip Adolf von Ehrenberg saw witches literally everywhere. It began with a few arrests, women accused of kind of just ruining crops or spreading plague even, but the trials spiraled quickly. Whole families were targeted, even noblemen and city officials were not spared. Children as young as 9 were accused of dancing with the devil and sent to burn. I mean, the methods of extraction were horrific until they confessed, and confessed they did, naming, others to end their suffering, which only, fed the endless chain of accusations. The numbers are staggering. In Wurzburg alone, between 157 and 219 executions took place across the surrounding territories. The demise toll may have reached about 900. The frenzy was so all-consuming that it threatened to depopulate entire villages. The Papenheimer witch trial in 1600 in Munich, Germany. Now, in the summer of 1600, a ragged family wandered the streets of Munich. Now, the Papenheimers were beggars accused of petty theft and other stuff, but when a string of unsolved crimes terrified the city, officials decided they'd found their scapegoats. Under torment, the family was forced to confess not only to the crimes in question, but also to witchcraft, devil worship, and just a laundry list of impossible acts, poisoning, wells and unaliving children and desecrating the Eucharist. Now, the more they denied, the worse the torment became. Authorities staged the executions as public theater. The Papenheimers were paraded through the streets, mutilated, and displayed before the crowds. Their supposed witches' tools were actually burned alongside them. This wasn't justice. It was a warning to the poor and the powerless that literally anyone could be next. The trial became infamous across Europe and just a symbol of, cruelty. Even in a time, when witch hunts were common, the sheer brutality shocked onlookers. But for the Papenheimers, there was no outcry strong enough to save them. Their names became synonymous with evil, not because of what they did, but because of what was done to them. The Bonus witches in 1679 in Scotland. Now, in the coastal town of Bo'ness, Scotland, the winter of 1679 brought with it more than just cold winds from the Firth and Forth. It brought accusations of the devil walking amongst the townsfolk. Now, 5 women, Margaret Pringle, Bessie Vicker, Annapole Thompson, and 2 Margaret Hamiltons, were accused of witchcraft, along with one man, William Craw. Now, the charges were wild, honestly, holding drunken feasts with the devil in human and animal form, making pacts in exchange for protection, and transforming into animals to avoid capture. The most disturbing confessions came from Annapole Thompson, who claimed the devil visited her as a man in black and promised to ease her poverty if she served him. Margaret Hamilton, an elderly widow, said that she had served him for 3 decades, often in the form of a black dog. Now, whether these were delusions, coerced statements, or just outright fabrications, the court treated them as, proof. On December 23rd, 1679, the condemned were asphyxiated with iron collars, their bodies burned at the stake, and the execution was public, part punishment, part, spectacle, meant to remind the living there of the price of basically dancing with the devil. Now, today, the Bonus witches are remembered not as servants of darkness, but as victims of a darkness far more real, the cruelty of human fear. Now, across continents and centuries, these stories repeat. Fear turns to accusation, accusation to torment, torment to execution. Innocent lives ended not because of what they'd done, but because of what their communities were willing to believe.
Alrighty folks, I'm gonna kick this off with less of a mystery and more of a crime from the 90s in the name of the occult that hurt my brain. Yeah, it's probably more recent than expected, but bear with me here. Welcome to the dark and twisted world of the Beasts of Satan. a name that echoes not just a criminal group, but a haunting chapter in the tales of occult mysteries from history. See, I like a good rhyme. The sinister saga unfolds like a macabre symphony, blending elements of satanic rituals, heavy metal music, and gruesome killings in a chilling crescendo that gripped Italy from 1998 until 2004. It all began with the red-soaked canvas of a double homicide in the woods near Somolombardo, a locale that would later be stained with more tales of horror. Chiara Marino and Fabio Tolis, a young couple immersed in the metal subculture, were sacrificed in a substance-fueled occult rite, marking the inception of a series of satanic ritual killing. The perpetrators, including names like Andrea Volpe, Nicola Sapone, and Mario Macchione, were not merely acquaintances, they were friends who turned into agents of the malevolence. The initial investigation stumbled, attributing the disappearance of the couple to a love affair gone awry. However, Fabio Tolis' father, Michel Tolis, embarked on a personal quest to unravel the truth. His persistence revealed a nexus between Satanism, the occult, and the black and death metal genres that his son and friends were drawn to. The story takes a darker turn with the third killing in 2004, involving Mariangela Pizzotta, a former girlfriend of Andrea Volpe. The details are gruesome, and she was fired at, mutilated, and buried alive in a greenhouse. The crimes were not just about death, but a perverse dance with it, marked by addiction and substance-fueled madness. As the investigation progressed, the abyss widened, revealing potential connections to other unsolved cases. The alleged involvement of the beasts of Satan in up to 14 other mysterious deaths, including self-inflicted ones, disappearances, and violent incidents, cast a shadow of terror over the entire situation. The trials that followed saw convictions, but the reactions were kinda mixed. The sentence seemed inadequate to some, while others found solace in the semblance of justice. Life imprisonment awaited the leader, Nicola Sapone, while others faced long terms behind bars. The aftermath of this dark chapter extended beyond prison walls. Concerns about Satanism's allure amongst Italian youth grew, prompting calls for bans on death metal music. The revelations led to the establishment of a specialized police unit focused on investigating new religious sects and ritualistic groups, signaling a societal response to the fear that gripped the nation. Okay, so this next situation is less so a mystery, but another historical occult crime that I can't go without mentioning today. If Aleister Crowley isn't the first person that pops into your brain when you think about occult wrongdoings in history, I'd like to know who is. Born in 1875, Aleister Crowley was one of the most notorious occultists in the modern era. He had a rebellious youth when he joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he was trained in ceremonial magic by Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers and Alan Bennett. He went mountaineering in Mexico with Oscar Eckenstein before studying Hindu and Buddhist practices in India. In 1904, he married Rose Edith Kelly and they honeymooned in Cairo, Egypt, where Crowley claimed to have been contacted by a supernatural entity named Aiwas, who provided him with the Book of the Law, a sacred text that served as the basis for Thelema, a traveler who loved the mountains. Aleister sought the most extreme and obscure forms of magic. In 1900, he attempted the Abramelin ritual, which required 6 months to complete and allegedly gave him control over the 12 lords of hell. However, he abandoned the ritual before completing it, which I don't blame him. 6 months is a long time. So he then founded his own religion, Thelema, identifying himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity. After the unsuccessful 1905 Kachinjunga expedition and a visit to India and China, Aleister returned to Britain, where he attracted attention as a prolific author of poetry, novels, and occult literature. In 1907, he and George Cecil Jones co-founded an esoteric order, through which they propagated Thelema. After spending time in Algeria, in 1912, Aleister was initiated into another esoteric order, the German-based Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO for short, rising to become the leader of its British branch, which he reformulated in accordance with his personal beliefs. Through the OTO, Thelemite groups were established in Britain, Australia, and North America. Aleister spent the First World War in the United States, where he took up painting and campaigned for the German war effort against Britain, later revealing that he had infiltrated the pro-German movement to assist the British intelligence services. In 1920, he established the Abbey of Thelema, a religious commune in Cefalù, Sicily, where he lived with various followers. His libertine lifestyle led to denunciations in the British press, and the Italian government evicted him in 1923. He divided the following 2 decades between France, Germany, and England, and continued to promote his religion until his death. The Book of Necronomicon, dedicated to Aleister, mentions that necromantic magic has caused changes in the consciousness for, those who were most intimately involved with it. Therefore, it undertakes the principle of facing all the fears and darkness that resides within to reach the light and spirit within the soul. Aleister believed sincerely in the existence of magic, to the point where he performed Enochian magic to make himself invisible. He's even stated that apparently once upon a time a vampire attacked him, which, excuse me? I would like to know more about that. Alrighty, now to get into some fun mysteries. How about we start off with a werewolf? So The Werewolf of Bedberg, a tale that weaves through the fabric of the 17th century, is a chilling narrative that transcends the boundaries of mere folklore. At its core is Peter Stubbe, a seemingly upstanding member of society, a wealthy farmer, a widower, and a father to 2 offspring. Yet beneath this facade lies a creature of the night, a werewolf with an insatiable appetite for human redness and a penchant for unspeakable horrors. Peter's alleged crimes are not for the faint of heart. The laundry list of atrocities include taking schmexual advantage of people, hurting folks in the same vein, the gruesome act of ripping spawn from pregnant women, and the rope necklacing of small humans, and also the raw consumption of innocent lambs and calves. I apologize if any of that verbiage confused you. The interwebs don't like me talking about icky criminal acts, but if we're going to ignore history, then we're doomed to repeat it. So I'm doing the best I can here. If you have questions, I'm sure somebody in the comments can help you out. The depths of his depravity reached their peak with the horrific mass killing of his own family, a monstrous act that involved impregnating his daughter, killing his son, and then devouring the young one's brains. Sheesh. The community that once held him in high regard as a two-faced, empathetic widower now recoiled in horror as the true nature of Peter was unveiled. The Werewolf of Bedberg was not just a mythical creature in the shadows, it was a very real madness that had infiltrated the fabric of daily life. The climax of this tale, as with many stories of its kind, is the capture and execution of the monstrous perpetrator. Peter met his end, and the echoes of his gruesome deeds reverberated through, history books. This harrowing narrative has persisted over centuries, retold and adapted, capturing the collective imagination of, everybody. This werewolf stands not only as a tale of horror, but as a reminder that things are kind of scary out there, we don't know everything, and that's my nightmare fuel right there. Ready to hang out in the 1600s for a minute? Me too! Let's go back in time together. The Drummer of Tedworth, a tale hailing from the depths of the 1600s, unfolds like a spectral melody resonating through the corridors of Wiltshire's haunted history. Picture this: a mysterious drummer, unseen but omnipresent, wandering through the streets of Tedworth, drumming not just a rhythmic beat, but an unsettling demand for money. Sounds like every freak show I've been at ever. In the midst of this spectral drumming, a man named John Mompesson, perturbed by the relentless rhythms, decides to take matters into his own hand. He has the drummer apprehended, his drum confiscated until he confesses to the alleged fraud of his actions. The paranormal percussionist, once detained, vanishes from the scene upon his release, leaving behind an eerie quiet that precedes an even stranger turn of events. As Mompesson embarks on a journey to London, a trip meant to provide respite, his family becomes the unwilling audience to a haunting encore. The air is pierced by the unmistakable sounds of drumming, loud and relentless, echoing through the walls of their home. The drummer, once a tangible figure, transforms into an ethereal presence, playing his spectral beats in the dead of night. First recorded in a pamphlet in 1678, the story of the Drummer of Tedworth has endured the test of time, weaving its way into the fabric of occult discussions. Whether regarded as a piece of historical mystery or dismissed as a mere legend, the tale of the haunted drum and its ghostly percussionist persists, a mysterious echo from a bygone era that refuses to be silenced. See, I promised y'all actual mysteries today. Alrighty, we're gonna end this entire list with a tale from biblical times. So how was that for a history lesson? The Witch of Endor, a mysterious figure embedded in the ancient tapestry of the Hebrew Bible, emerges in the book of 1 Samuel 28, a chapter that plunges us into the realm of the supernatural. So, picture this. King Saul, facing imminent battle and devoid of his trusted seer Samuel, turns to this mystical practitioner for guidance, a desperate grasp at the threads connecting the living and the dead. Saul's quest for insight, his yearning for a conduit to the spirit world, leads him to the Witch of Endor. It's a moment steeped in desperation, a king seeking answers beyond the veil of the tangible. The encounter unfolds, and the revelation is chilling, a proclamation of Saul's impending defeat, a destiny sealed in the threads of the spiritual fabric. This occult liaison catapults the Witch of Endor into the realms of necromancy and spiritualism. In the intricate mosaic of various occult practices and modern paganism, she becomes a symbol, a psychic medium representing the land surrounding Israel. The questions that arise from her tale delve into the moral quandaries of her actions, probing the delicate threads that bind the living to the ethereal. The Witch of Endor's story, a kaleidoscope of interpretation, weaves its way through the chapters of history, each retelling adding nuances to the intricate dance between the realms. It's more than a narrative. It's a philosophical exploration of the intersection between the living and the dead, a contemplation of the morality embedded in the pursuit of supernatural knowledge. As we unravel the layers of her tale, we confront the enduring power of occult witchcraft and the intricacies of the spiritual realm. The Witch of Endor, a spectral figure from the ancient past, beckons us to contemplate the unseen forces that shape our world, leaving us with more questions than answers. a perpetual mystery echoing through the corridors of time.
Starting off at number 5, burning at the stake. By far the most well-known punishment for those tried as witches, burning at the stake was a cruel and unusual form of execution used commonly back during the many witch trials of the 17th century. These executions were not only physically agonizing, but also symbolized the depths of human fear and prejudice. One such example of this terrible practice was the Worsburg witch trials of the 17th century, known as one of the largest witch trials in history. Accused witches faced a horrifying fate at the stake. The authorities believed that fire possessed the purifying power to cleanse the accused of their alleged connections to the devil. In reality, it was a grotesque display of violence. Victims were often tied to wooden stakes in a public square, surrounded by jeering crowds. They were subjected to unimaginable pain as the flames slowly consumed them. The agony of being burnt alive was drawn out, excruciating, and inhumane. What made the burning of witches particularly cruel was the complete absence of credible evidence. The trials were fueled by paranoia, superstition, and hysteria. Accusations were often based on flimsy hearsay, personal grudges, or even just random suspicions. The accused had little chance to defend themselves, and confessions were often extracted through rigorous mental and physical torment. These false confessions only added to the tragedy, as innocent people were forced to implicate themselves and others in a desperate attempt to end their suffering. Furthermore, the persecution of witches during the Wurzburg witch trials, like many other witch hunts, was often intertwined with gender bias. Women, especially those who didn't conform to societal norms, were disproportionately targeted. Accusations of witchcraft could be used to control and punish women who challenged the status quo or were perceived as a threat to male authority. The cruelty of burning witches at the stake was not limited to the physical torment. It was a gruesome spectacle intended to terrify the populace into submission. Public executions were meant to send a message that dissent would not be tolerated and that conformity to prevailing religious and social norms was imperative. The psychological impact on society was profound, as fear and mistrust tore communities apart. The Wurzburg witch trials, like many others, were eventually recognized as a dark chapter in history. They serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, religious fanaticism, and the absence of due process. Today, we look back on these events with horror and regret, vowing never to repeat the cruelty of burning alleged witches at the stake. It is a somber lesson that underscores the importance of justice, reason, and compassion in our pursuit of a more enlightened society. Next up at number 4, witch cakes. Witch cakes are a bizarre and unsettling aspect of the witch trials that swept through colonial America during the 17th century, as exemplified in the infamous case of Tituba. These cakes, concocted from peculiar ingredients, were believed to possess the power to reveal the presence of witches. While they may seem like a bizarre footnote in history, witch cakes serve as a chilling reminder of the hysteria and irrationality that fueled the witch trials. In the case of Tituba, a slave woman living in Salem, Massachusetts, witch cakes played a central role in her ordeal. Tituba was accused of practicing witchcraft, and her accuser sought a means to expose her supposed demonic affiliations. They decided to bake a witch cake, a crude mixture of rye meal and the urine of the afflicted girls who claimed to be victims of witchcraft. Ew. The logic behind these cakes was deeply flawed and rooted in superstition. It was believed that by feeding the cake to a dog, the dog would act as a conduit, causing the witch to experience pain and reveal their true nature. This bizarre form of witch detection demonstrates the length of which fear and paranoia can drive people to concoct irrational and cruel methods of persecution. Tituba was subjected to this ordeal, and when the dog exhibited unusual behavior, because it was eating urine, it was seen as evidence of her guilt. This marked the beginning of her traumatic journey through the Salem witch trials, which ultimately led to her confession under duress. The use of witch cakes underscores the hysteria and desperation that characterized the witch trials. Accusers and authorities were willing to resort to absurd and unscientific methods to justify their persecution of those they believed to be witches. These methods were not only illogical, but also cruel, as they subjected the accused to public humiliation, physical examinations, and often torment. Number 3, dunking. Dunking was a cruel and unusual punishment employed during the witch trials that swept through Europe and its colonies in the 16th and 17th centuries, including Northamptonshire, England. This brutal practice, also known as ducking or swimming, was intended to determine an individual's guilt or innocence of witchcraft, but it often resulted in severe physical and psychological suffering. In Northamptonshire and other regions, dunking involved binding the accused witch, often a woman, and lowering her into a body of water, typically a river or pond. The rationale behind this test was rooted in superstition and flawed logic. It was believed that because witches had renounced their baptism, the pure element of water would reject them, causing them to float. If the accused floated, they were seen as guilty of witchcraft. If they sank, they were deemed innocent, but often drowned in the process. Being forcibly dunked into cold water while bound was a terrifying and painful experience. The accused would struggle for air and face the risk of drowning, all while the onlookers watched in morbid anticipation. Dunking was an arbitrary and irrational method of determining guilt. The outcome depended on various factors, such as the accused body's composition and the skill of the dunking implementers. Innocent people could easily be declared guilty, leading to wrongful executions. Despite its cruelty and lack of reliability, dunking persisted in witch trials because it was consistent with the prevailing belief in the supernatural and the desire for swift justice. It was only with the eventual decline of witch hunts and the advent of more rational legal systems that such inhumane practices were abandoned. At number 2, prayer tests. Prayer tests stand as the greatest example of the unjust nature of the witch trials and the persecution of innocent individuals, making it a cruel punishment for anyone put on trial. They were a controversial and often absurd method used during the witch trials to supposedly rule out witches. These tests were grounded in superstition and religious fervor rather than sound evidence. Two notable cases, those of Jane Wenham and George Burroughs, shed light on the use and cruel consequences of such prayer tests during witch trials. Jane Wenham's case is one of the last witch trials in England, occurring in 1712. She was accused of witchcraft in Hertfordshire, and her trial attracted considerable attention due to the changing climate of skepticism regarding witch trials. One of the methods employed to test her guilt or innocence was the prayer test. In Wenham's trial, the prayer test involved having the accused recite the Lord's Prayer without error, usually out of the Bible or other holy texts. It was believed that a witch would be unable to utter the prayer correctly due to their alleged unholy nature. However, this test was deeply flawed and arbitrary, as it ignored the fact that many accused witches were uneducated and might struggle with reading the Lord's Prayer, especially in the intense and stressful environment of a trial. She also underwent dunking in order to test her witchy nature. Fortunately, Jane Wenham was found not guilty, thanks to the rising skepticism surrounding witchcraft. Even when accused of flying, the judge would retort, "Is flying a crime?" Which it isn't. Her case is often cited as a turning point in England's witch trials, as it exposed the irrationality and injustice of such proceedings. But in the case of George Burroughs in 1692, he wasn't so lucky. George Burroughs was one of the individuals accused and executed during the Salem witch trials in colonial Massachusetts. His case highlights how the prayer test was used in the American context. In Burroughs' trial, the authorities used the Lord's Prayer as a test of his innocence. They believed that if he couldn't recite it correctly, he must be a witch. Burroughs, to the astonishment of many, recited the prayer flawlessly, challenging the validity of the test. However, the court, fueled by hysteria and prejudice, dismissed this as a trick of the devil. So much for testing him, right? George Burroughs was ultimately convicted and hanged, illustrating how even when an accused individual passed the prayer test, it did not guarantee their acquittal or protection from the witch hunt's irrationality. So yeah, if you were wanted dead back then, you would be made dead. And at number 1, crushing. In the annals of history, the Salem witch trials of 1692 stand as a stark testament to humanity's capacity for cruelty, particularly in the realm of legal punishment. Amid the hysteria that gripped colonial Massachusetts, a plethora of cruel and unusual methods were employed to elicit confessions from the accused witches. Among these harrowing practices, the use of pressing or crushing remains one of the most chilling. The process of pressing was as brutal as it was inhumane. The accused individual would be stripped of all dignity and laid down in a dark, dank cell. Heavy stones or wooden boards, laden with an unimaginable weight, would then be stacked upon their chest. The agony that followed was beyond words. As the relentless pressure bore down, every grasp for breath became a desperate struggle. The rationale behind this method was chillingly simplistic. Those who confessed to their alleged dealings with the devil could halt the pressing, while those who resisted would face an excruciating demise. The authorities, consumed by fear and paranoia, believed that witches, having supposedly consorted with Satan, possessed a supernatural resilience that rendered them impervious to such torment. The cruelty of pressing was evident not only in its physical brutality, but also in its stark absence of due process. Accused witches had no chance to defend themselves, no legal representation, and no recourse to justice. Their fates rested in the hands of accusers and a court swayed by mass hysteria and irrational beliefs. Perhaps the most infamous case of pressing during the Salem witch trials was that of Giles Corey. A resilient and principled man, Corey refused to enter a plea, knowing that doing so would lead to the forfeiture of his property. His stoic resistance, in the face of a slow and agonizing death, made him a symbol of defiance against the unjust trials.
Number 5. Robert Liston. I figured I'd start with Robert Liston since he's a bit of an outlier on this list, because unlike the other ones, I don't know if he was truly evil, but he just enjoyed life much differently than the rest of us. You see, Robert Liston was a Scottish surgeon in the 19th century who had a pretty notable reputation. He was the fastest blade in the West End. He boasted that no one could slice and dice faster than he could if the legends about him are to be believed. He was allegedly able to perform a full amputation of a limb in 3 minutes, only losing 1 out of every 10 patients, which honestly, all things considered, is actually a pretty impressive feat, if not an absolutely terrifying one to think about. Liston didn't really have bedside manner to speak of though, and he would take a glee in his work that kind of bordered on sadism. He wasn't a mad scientist plotting world domination, but he was a particularly odd fellow who really reveled in how good he was at removing people's limbs. Everybody's got a hobby, everybody's got something that makes them happy. One particularly grisly anecdote says he once severed a leg in under 30 seconds and gleefully laughed to his crowd of spectators, "Time me, boys!" So evil? I don't know, maybe not. Questionable? Absolutely. Would I hang out with this guy? Probably not while he was working. The issue with Liston is that while he definitely had speed, and no one could argue that, accuracy was not always his strongest suit. Frequently, his rush work would result in his patients having unnecessary complications and conditions such as dying. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Liston has the world's only surgery with a 300% mortality rate. In one occasion, he was working so quickly and carelessly that he amputated his assistant's own fingers off while attempting to sever a leg. And as he was doing this, he swung the knife backwards and ended up hitting a spectator who fainted out of shock. The patient, the assistant, and the spectator all died a few days later, leading to the only surgery that managed to lead to the death of 3 people. That's an impressive record, if nothing else. And my friends, if you'd like to hear more freaky stories, true crime, cryptid sightings, UFO conspiracies, and just about everything scary under the sun and above it, why don't you give Top 5 Scary a subscribe for the best scary content on the net, and keep on screaming. Alright, moving on. Number 4, Jose Delgado. Do you think you could control a bull? I definitely don't. But Jose Delgado believed he could. He was a controversial researcher who believed that the best way to get an animal to behave was not by training it or teaching it a trick and giving it a treat every time it does the trick right, but to implant a series of electrodes into an animal's brain to be able to manually control it with a series of electroshocks. To make a lot of very complicated neuroscience comically short in layman's terms, he was creating remote control monkeys. And do you kind of want one now? Because I kind of want one. Delgado signed on to Yale University sometime in the 1950s, where he set up his little shop in a lab tinkering with all sorts of fun electronic experiments and gizmos to research new methods of control. Oftentimes, it was literally the flip of a switch that would alter the mood of a creature. The thing is, as scary as what he did, the results he was getting were unbelievable, stuff straight out of sci-fi. He was able to train monkeys by stimulating the parts of their brain that would activate aggression, and he would teach them how to manipulate other monkeys that were threatening them by flipping the switches of their aggression. It's nuts. Did you watch Westworld? I know you probably watched the first season at least. I've seen the viewership numbers. You know how in that show they could use those little tablets to open up like a cowboy robot's personality and alter all those stats like aggression, romance, bravery, etc, etc. Well, that's kind of what Delgado was doing, only on chimps instead of Evan Rachel Wood. One controversial experiment involved generating a painful sensation in a chimp's brain every time it produced a particular brain signal, which eventually led to the chimp learning not to think like that. Woof. Delgado's most infamous trial though was the one I mentioned at the beginning, stopping a bull in its tracks. He stood in front of a bull and, like the matadors of legend, stared it down and used a shortwave radio and a series of electrodes to freeze it in place. Johnny Knoxville would have loved that. Now, despite the controversial nature of his work, which inspired quite a good amount of debate and discussion about ethics, Delgado maintained up until his dying day that the work he was doing was for the benefit of mankind. He wasn't trying to develop mind control, nor did he see his experiments as a way to influence people, but rather he saw his work as a way to overcome mental illness eventually, and cure brain disorders, and also probably save the lives of a lot of bullfighters. Number 3. Giovanni Aldini. So I don't want to spoil too much about this guy right away, but all I'll say is that Giovanni Aldini would end up being the source of inspiration for the character of Victor Frankenstein from Mary Shelley's famous sci-fi novel. So you can probably sort of guess what kind of things this guy was gonna get up to without even having to listen to the next 2 minutes, but I'm sure you're very curious, so I'll explain it to you in great detail anyway. As a young boy, Giovanni was fascinated by his uncle, who was also a physician, and would watch him perform strange experiments. His uncle had an interest in reanimating the dead to see if it was possible to restore vigor to an animal that had passed, and he primarily tested on frogs, where he would attach electrical currents to them. These events, unsurprisingly, would very profoundly affect Giovanni, who sought out to recreate what his uncle had started, only on a much bigger target. It's man if you couldn't figure that out by now. As he grew older, Giovanni followed in his uncle's footsteps, zapping frog corpses, moving up to trying to reanimate a bull's head, until ultimately earning his place in mad science history when he started to begin his trials on humans. He sourced his bodies from executed prisoners, thinking, hey, they're done with them, I might as well use them. Trouble was that Italy tended to prefer execution methods that involved the head and the body going in separate directions, although Giovanni made use of this as well. He discovered that with an electric current he could make a patient's face contort, and this was on a head detached from a body. There's a terrifying mental image for you for the day. It was then, when he started sourcing prisoners' bodies from England, that he started to inch closer and closer to that goal of reanimation. He asked for a body as fresh as possible, and he got one George Foster, not the one who played for the Reds though. Attaching probes to this body, astoundingly, he got the man to open an eye, shake his jaw, and seemingly take a breath. This would end up being his last experiment, however, and he deemed the experiment a failure because the thing didn't sprung to life Frankenstein style. Chin up! I bet you'd love to know that your legacy was inspiring one of the most famous horror stories ever about a lunatic doctor who electrifies a corpse. Number 2. Albert Kligman. Now, I feel like it bears mentioning before I even talk about all the twisted weird stuff that he did to earn his place in this list of evil scientists that Kligman just sounds like an evil scientist name, does it not? Like if you were writing a movie script, Kligman would be the stand-in name for your evil scientist before you could come up with a better one. Anyway, I digress. Dr. Albert Kligman was a dermatologist who was commissioned by Dow Jones and the US Army to research the effects of chemical compounds on human skin. Oh, yep, this is not going anywhere good. It goes without saying, but like he wasn't checking for Head and Shoulders 3-in-1 conditioner. Kligman was offered a modest lump sum of 10 grand in grant money to research, and he set up shop right away in Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia, where he got a near endless supply of test subjects, or victims, to experiment on with very little regard for their safety or hygiene. It was documented that the experiments at Holmesburg Prison included hair transplants, implantation of foreign bodies, burns and radiation of the skin, exposure to dioxin, application and ingestion of toxic and near lethal doses of acne medicine, and the yanking of fingernails. Ugh. I completely understand if you need a moment to just kind of catch yourself. And editors, I'm so sorry for the pictures you guys are looking at for this video. You guys work hard. Alright, let's get back to talking about stomach-churning evil done in the name of science. One of the main compounds Kligman researched that I listed off in that little list before was dioxin, the main ingredient of Agent Orange, the infamously evil chemical weapon the USA used during the Vietnam War. Inmates would be scarred, left sick with permanently disfiguring skin conditions leading to very painful side effects. Oftentimes too, many subjects were exposed to all sorts of contaminants and other infections from other conditions he was doing, other experiments he was doing. He did not keep a clean workspace. Kligman destroyed many of the notes from his research, but through testaments from his victims, we know the truth of what he got up to. While there were attempts to get justice after the fact for what the inmates experienced, Kligman himself lived to the age of 93 and never faced any sort of consequences whatsoever for his actions. In fact, the worst part is Kligman loved what he did. Take a listen to this spine-chilling real quote from a real scientist who was really hired by the US Army. "All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time." That sounds like it's from one of the Saw movies. Are you kidding me? Okay, moving on. Somehow there's a guy who tops this. And finally, number 1, Sidney Gottlieb. Unlike the other scientists on this list, where I would offer a little bit of leeway onto whether or not you could truly consider them to be vile and evil outright, or just, a bit morally flexible in the name of progress, I actually feel very decent taking a stance and saying Sidney Gottlieb was pure evil. Gottlieb was an American chemist and spy master who helmed the CIA's infamous MK Ultra program. Surely, if you've watched even 2 videos featuring me, you have heard me yell like a lunatic about the MK Ultra program. The CIA's very real, very well documented, very traceable mind control program that they were very really researching in the 60s and 70s. And this lovely son of a gun was behind most of it. Gottlieb is about as close to the pop culture definition of an evil scientist as you can get. He believed that there was a way to influence the human mind to ensure global domination for the United States. At the height of the Cold War, the CIA believed that China and Russia had advancements in mind control technology and they needed to catch up. Gottlieb was commissioned to run a series of experiments. Initially, the goal was to develop a truth serum. Gottlieb would experiment with just about every single illegal, illicit substance you could on humans, most of the time without them knowing what he was doing. He tested on volunteers, prisoners, homeless, but most often people had no idea the nature of his experiments, and he tended to pick people who had nothing left and had a lot to gain. After months and months of this left him unsatisfied, he was granted extra powers and resources for his experiments, gaining the full funding of the US Army. The goal of MK Ultra was to develop techniques that would crush the human psyche to the point that it would admit anything. Wow. This included torment like electroshock, sensory and sleep deprivation, all kinds of illicit substances, physical and mental damage, and so much more we can't even talk about. Eventually, the program was officially disbanded, citing that it was difficult to control the human psyche in this way. Gottlieb would stick around, however, since he had a real taste for doing evil science, and would helm the CIA's poison research division, looking into just about every way you could conceivably poison a human being, including one infamous poisoned cigar for one Fidel Castro. Gottlieb retired in relative obscurity, never seeing any justice for his work, and lived out his days quietly in Virginia, largely forgotten by history. Well, not by me. Sorry, if you're the real life inspiration for Papa on Stranger Things, you're gonna be the number 1 evil scientist on this list.
Now I'm starting off today's list with the first person that came to my mind, the great Rasputin. Close family friend of the last royal Russian family, he was originally introduced to them as a faith healer who could aid their only son, Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia. A self-described mystic and holy man, Rasputin was a figure of much debate amongst the royal court, with some describing him as a visionary and prophet, others as a charlatan and scam artist. Historians believe that his scandalous reputation and influence over the Romanovs only helped to discredit and overthrow the family. Having taken many pilgrimages to holy monasteries, he developed a reputation as a revered holy man, gaining a small circle of followers who believed in his miracles, and began leading private prayer meetings, much to the scorn and suspicion of villagers and priests. It was rumored that female followers were ceremonially washing him before each meeting, that the group sang strange songs, and even that they had joined a religious sect whose rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and orgies. Word of Rasputin's activity and charisma began to spread in Siberia during the early 1900s, where he developed many friendships with high-ranking religious leaders, eventually leading to his introduction to the royal family. It's not certain when Rasputin first acted as Alexei's healer, with the earliest record on date being when he was summoned by Alexandra to pray for Alexei when he had an internal hemorrhage in the spring of 1907, with the young royal healing by the next morning. Due to his closeness with the family, Rasputin was allowed intimate access to the family, in situations that governesses to the young royals described as inappropriate. One governess in particular was released from her position simply for voicing her concerns about Rasputin being allowed around the young ones while they were clad in nothing but their nightgowns. Another one of the nursery governesses claimed in the spring of 1910 that she was seduced into sexual acts against her will by Rasputin, originally having been a devotee of the man, but was later disillusioned by him. The empress refused to believe her and said that everything Rasputin does is holy, later dismissing the governess. It was whispered in society that Rasputin had seduced not only the Tsarina, but also the 4 young grand duchesses. Rasputin had released passionate letters written to him by the Tsarina and the 4 grand duchesses throughout society. In 1916, a group of nobles led by Prince Felix Yusupov banded together, deciding to assassinate the holy man for his influence over the Tsarina and her family. It is said that the prince invited Rasputin to his place shortly after midnight, where he offered the man tea and cakes which had been laced with cyanide. Rasputin initially said no, but then began to eat the cakes, and to Felix's surprise, appeared unaffected by the poison. Then he asked for wine, which had also obviously been poisoned, drank 3 glasses, and still showed no signs of distress. So around 2:30 in the morning, Felix excused himself to go upstairs, where his fellow conspirators were waiting, and he grabbed a revolver and returned to the basement, telling Rasputin that he'd better look at the crucifix and say a prayer, referring to a crucifix in the room, then, nailed him once in the chest. Rasputin leapt up from the explosive and attacked Felix, who freed himself with some effort and fled upstairs. Rasputin followed Felix, where he was once again impaled with an explosive, and he collapsed into a snowbank. The group of men that wrapped his body in cloth drove it to the Petrovsky Bridge, and then, they all dropped it in the Malaya Nevka River. If you missed something there, it took a combination of cyanide, multiple rounds of explosives, and drowning before Rasputin met the end of time. There's no way that wasn't witchcraft. Okay, we're gonna move on before I see his face in my nightmares tonight. I already had one last night, I don't need more. So when it comes to history, some folks stand out for being a hero. Great virtue. Nobody today, though. They're all going to stand out for their descent into darkness. Mary Bateman, a woman born in Assenbury, Yorkshire in 1768, was kind of that sort of person. Her life, detailed in The Extraordinary Life and Character of Mary Bateman, fitting title, reads like a macabre tale of deceit, poison, and a chilling transformation from a seemingly ordinary existence to a practitioner of dark arts. Raised on a farm, Mary transitioned from a farm girl to a servant in Thirsk when she reached her teens. Her life took an ominous turn when she was 20, and she moved to York and worked as a dressmaker. A year later, she found herself entangled in a burglary and subsequently fled to Leeds. Over the following years, Mary's occupation shifted from mantua maker to fortune teller and wise woman, gradually building her reputation in the shadows. In 1792, she married John Bateman, but her criminal inclinations persisted. Robberies, prison escapes, even accusations of working as an abortionist marked her darker exploits. Her criminal activities continued even after her marriage, as she roamed the streets of Leeds, posing as a charitable soul, collecting goods for fire victims, only to keep the gifts for herself. In a peculiar twist, Mary joined the followers of the prophetess Joanna Southcott in 1806. She orchestrated the infamous Prophet Hen of Leeds hoax, claiming that eggs laid by a hen bore apocalyptic messages. A penny was the price of admission to witness these so-called prophetic eggs. However, the truth behind the spectacle revealed Mary's deceitful hand. She had written on the eggs using ink and cunningly reinserted them into the hen. The year 1806 marked another dark chapter in Mary's life when she was approached by William and Rebecca Perigo. Claiming Rebecca was under a spell, Mary began feeding them poisoned pudding, leading to Rebecca's demise in 1808. William accused Mary of both poisoning his wife and defrauding them for charms and cures. Mary's trial in York in March of 1809 painted a picture of a cunning and malevolent woman. The jury swiftly found her guilty of fraud and Rebecca's, death. Facing execution, Mary attempted to evade, rope necklace by declaring pregnancy. A panel of matrons assessed her claim, but the jury of women found it false. So on March 20th, Mary met her end at the gallows alongside a couple of men. Oh, but her story does not end here. I wish it did. The after-death fate of Mary Bateman took a gruesome turn, so after her execution, her body was displayed at Leeds General Infirmary, charging visitors for the macabre spectacle. Dissected by William Hay, her remains became a commodity. Strips of her skin were turned into charms, and the tip of her tongue became a morbid keepsake. No thanks. Next up, we have Walpurga Hausmann. So her life at first glance was kind of unremarkable. Born in Bavaria between 1510 and 1527, she spent her days as a midwife, aiding her community. But of course, she couldn't be good, or else she wouldn't be here. Story took a dark turn in 1587 when she became one of the subjects of a ruthless witch trial in Germany. Now, the charges against her were nothing short of horrifying. Witchcraft, sorcery, even vampirism. Under punishment, she confessed to a bizarre tale involving a demon named Federlin, who appeared to her in the guise of a male co-worker. She claimed this demon led her to pledge allegiance to the devil, promising to free her from poverty. As she recounted in her confession, she'd indulged in macabre rituals with Federlin and the devil himself, consuming the roasted flesh of young humans and drinking wine. She described frequent visits to the devil and her demon lover, often engaging in sexual encounters. You do what you do. Remarkably, she had the power to make her demon lover leave by simply invoking the name of Jesus. Hey, if it works, it works. Now, her confession also included acts of harm using a magical ointment that she had received from her demon lover. This ointment was used to end the lives of many, including the young and animals. Her list of alleged victims was extensive, including 41 young humans, 2 laboring mothers, and a variety of animals. The swift and unanimous decision of the authorities led to her conviction and a gruesome sentence. Before her execution by burning, she endured multiple branding ceremonies, and her right hand, the very hand she had used as a midwife, was severed. Finally, she met her end at the stake, and her ashes were discarded into a stream. Goodbye. Off you go. Time to travel over to Paris, France, where we meet La Voisin, also known as Catherine Deschaise. Not a lot is known about her early life. She learned fortune telling when she was young and later married Antoine Montvoisin, who was active as a jeweler and silk merchant with a shop at Pont-Marie in Paris. When her husband's trade business led to bankruptcy, La Voisin supported the family by practicing chiromancy and face reading. In addition to being a fortune teller, she was also active as a midwife, which developed into providing abortions. Her business as a fortune teller gradually developed into manufacturing and selling purported magical objects and potions, also arranging black masses and selling aphrodisiacs and poison to profit from her clients' wishes upon their future. She supported a family of 6, though, including her husband, her mother, and her offspring. She was known to have at least 6 lovers: the executioner André Guillaume, Monsieur Latour, Vicomte de Cousseran, the Comte de la Bâtie, the alchemist Blessis, the architect Fauché, and the magician Adam Lesage. She was, once again, a French fortune teller, commissioned poisoner, I'm gonna emphasize that, and a professional provider of alleged sorcery. She was the head of a network in Paris of witches. So that's how she provided all those poisons, aphrodisiacs, magical services, black masses. She had like a whole network going for her. Her organization of commissioned black magic and poison killings was suspected to have killed over 1,000 people, but it's actually believed that around 2,500 people might have met their ends because of her. Yikes! Oh, and by the way, she was a central figure in the famous Affaire de Poison, in case you didn't know. And because I'm in a fun mood today, let's end this with another male wit. Folks really don't like to talk about that in textbooks, but they did exist. So Gilles Garnier was a reclusive loner living in the woods around Dole, France. Despite being a solitary man, he did marry in 1572. Now historians have reported that Gilles was ill-equipped to provide for his family because he wasn't a really good hunter, since he only really was known to hunt for himself. So that's when he started hunting something else. Anybody wanna guess what? Come on. Yeah, human flesh. The first hunt happened around September 29th of 1572 when Garnier killed a young female, allegedly while in the form of a wolf, and brought some of the flesh home for his wife to eat. How thoughtful. Throughout the autumn, more young humans were found unalived and mutilated, including another young woman that Garnier bit and clawed at, but was interrupted by passerbys before fleeing. Sadly, the girl succumbed to her injuries a few days later. Now in November, Garnier ended the life of a young man this time, enjoying the flesh from his thighs and belly before tearing off a leg to save for later. I could name more, but I'm feeling a little queasy as it is. Now this caused a stir amongst the townspeople, who believed that it was a werewolf who was committing the horrors. Many folks had witnessed a humanoid-looking wolf near the scenes of the crimes, with the animal darting off once it was aware of being seen. Then in January of 1573, there was one last death. This time villagers heard a young person screaming and the sounds of a wolf, witnessing the wolf attempt to flee the scene, but changing into the form of Garnier as it did. He was then arrested, put on the rack, and confessed to killing the young and consuming their flesh. At his trial, more than 50 people testified, and he was found guilty of lycanthropy, you know, the ability to turn into an animal, and witchcraft. He and his wife were burned at the stake on January 8th of 1573. A witch and werewolf hybrid? Sounds a little too scary for my liking, unless I'm watching Vampire Diaries, which in that case, Team Damon. Maybe I should do that tonight. How about we kick things off with a decapitated saint and a talking head? Sounds like fun? I thought so. When the Vikings were raiding England in the 9th century, a saint named Edmund turned himself over to the invaders rather than have his people be overrun. According to the Lives of Saints, it was written by an author named Alfric of a word I cannot say. Now Alfric was an English abbot who wrote a lot of autobiographies, a lot of homilies, and a lot of biblical commentaries in the 10th and 11th centuries. He tried to convert the Viking invaders. Edmund tried to convert the Viking invaders, and in response they tormented and beheaded him, throwing his head into the forest. Contemporary Christian burial customs dictated the head must be buried with the body, for sake of wholeness, anticipating the resurrection of the dead at the Last Judgment. A witness who had seen the beheading had an idea where to look, so a search party traveled the woods calling out for Edmund. Eventually, hearing the head itself respond, "Here, here, here!" They find Edmund's head, which was speaking to them, miraculously being guarded by a wolf, which kept the other little critters at bay. After the head was recovered, Edmund was given a martyr's burial. Years later, the body was exhumed from the local churchyard to be moved to a nicer location, and apparently the body looked almost entirely healed, and the head had reattached itself to the body with just a thin red line around his neck to show where he had once been beheaded. No thank you. Little too creepy. Ooh, decapitation. Next up, a forgotten saint who haunts a blacksmith's dreams. Alfric wrote of a different saint, Swithun, whose gravesite had been forgotten by his community. So to ensure his veneration and remembrance, Swithun first appeared in a vision to a local blacksmith, telling him where to find the grave and how to know it's his. There's an iron ring on the coffin lid, and if you can pull it open, then all this has been true. The blacksmith was too scared to follow through, however, and an increasingly frustrated ghostie had to visit him 3 times before this guy finally went to the grave. Well, political turmoil in the local church prevented the original body from being moved inside the church, so his spirit was like, okay, let's try something else. He began appearing to others in the community, telling diseased people to visit his tomb to be healed. Eventually, the king noticed the healings and told the bishop to reinter the body within the church. After the body was moved, more and more people came to the tomb for healing. It was written that so much so that the walls were lined with the crutches and stools that had belonged to those who had been healed of their physical ailment. Look, I'm all for a ghosty doing good, but that's just a little wild. But hey, he got his point across. Here's a doozy: the determined ghost of a vengeful father. An Icelandic family saga known as the Saga of the People of Eyri catalogs several hauntings in medieval Iceland where the walking dead, called Drug in Old Norse, sometimes return with malicious intent. One of the tales is about a man named Arnkel and his father, Thorolf Haldfoot, who died sitting up, eyes open, at the family's dining room table. Arnkel warned his family not to walk in front of the man's line of sight. He covered up the face and ordered a hole to be cut in the wall through which Thorolf could be carried out, likely to confuse the body in case the undead tried to return home. Both of the oxen who carried the body to his grave died, as did many animals who went near his burial site, and soon Thorolf began haunting the valley, causing farming families to flee left and right. Arnkel decided to move the body, which was all undecayed and most evil to look upon. After they moved him to a new grave site, they built a wall around it in an attempt to keep Thorolf contained. Soon after, Arnkel was killed, and even the wall couldn't keep the ghost from returning to attempt to avenge his son. Another group of men exhumed Thorolf's body yet again, and this time they burned it, scattering the ashes in the sea. Some of the ashes, however, were caught in a wind, and a cow who accidentally ingested them later gave birth to a bull who killed a man who had been one of Arnkel's nemesis. Take that, folks. I love that kind of spiteful revenge. The Irish Banshee is a supernatural being in Irish folklore who is said to foretell death with a mournful wail. She is a female spirit, and she appears in lament to announce the forthcoming death of a family member. And she's been documented since like the Middle Ages. Like, she has been around for a minute. I'm sure you know all about her. Historians have traced the first stories, possibly, of the Banshee to the 8th century, and they were based on a tradition where women sang a sorrowful song to lament someone's death. They were known as keeners, and since they accepted booze as payment, they were said to be sinners and punished by being doomed to become banshees. Now, according to the mythology, if you spot one, she's going to vanish into a cloud of mist, and this action creates a noise similar to that of a bird flapping its wings. Now, once again, banshees don't cause death, they're just a warning of it. But when you associate a thing with another, when translated, banshee means fairy woman, and they are connected to the mythologically significant tumuli, a type of burial ground that rises up from the earth into a mound, and they've dotted the Irish countryside for hundreds of years. Very similar to like fairy villages. Now, descriptions of what banshees look like vary, but a common theme shows them having long, flowing hair, dressed in black or gray. Don't look at me. Some reports have even seen a woman with gray hair, white hair, black hair, or red hair. Whew, Biggie Brunette saved me just now. She's been reported as being old and ugly, or young and beautiful, but they're always noted as taking a form resembling a female-looking figure. Lady Fanshawe, a 16th century writer, claimed to have had a first-hand encounter. Her account describes a banshee as having red hair and a ghastly complexion. Lady Wilde, writing in the 19th century in Ancient Legends of Ireland, states the size of the banshee is another physical feature that differs between regional accounts. Though some accounts of her standing unnaturally tall are recorded, the majority of tales that describe her height state the banshee's stature as short, anywhere between 1 and 4 feet. Whew, once again, I am 5 feet, we're good. Her exceptional shortness often goes alongside the description of her as an old woman, though it may also be intended to emphasize her state as a fairy creature. Originally, many believed that the Irish banshee only visited those coming from a noble, powerful family, or pure Irish families, because traditionally there were only 5 major Irish families. Let's see if I get them all right. The O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the O'Grady's, and the Kavanaghs. However, it is believed that intermarriage has long since extended this selective list. And yes, although a visit from an Irish banshee may not seem the most welcome of encounters, the appearance of the banshee was seen as a fairy privilege. There's a wider Celtic tradition as well, by the way. Folks have documented similar spirits in Wales, Scotland, in the Highlands in particular. Accounts of banshees have also been found in Norman literature, but it's the Irish one that is the most famous. Nowadays, beliefs in the banshees are not common, like we're talking modern times. But we still talk about her. If I said like, hey, have you heard about a banshee? People are like, oh yeah, wail like a banshee, like it's still a common phrase. And finally for today, on December 4th of 1872, a British-American ship called the Mary Celeste was found abandoned and floating in the Atlantic Ocean. The Canadian brigantine Die Grazia found her in a disheveled but seaworthy condition, under partial sail and with her lifeboat missing. Now, she was found with her cargo fully intact, minus the lifeboat, which appeared to have been boarded in an orderly fashion, but why? We may never know. because nobody on board was ever heard from again. Gonna backtrack for a moment here. The Mary Celeste set sail from New York, bound for Italy in November of 1872. The ship was manned by Captain Benjamin Briggs and 7 crew members, including Briggs' wife and their offspring. A little bit of history on the captain. Benjamin Briggs was born in Wareham, Massachusetts on April 24th of 1835, one of 5 sons of famous sea captain Nathan Briggs. Now, all but one of the sons went to sea, becoming captains, so family traditions. Benjamin was an observant Christian who read the Bible regularly and often bore witness to his faith at prayer meetings. And in 1862, he married his cousin, Sarah, and enjoyed a Mediterranean honeymoon on board his ship, the Forest King. Now they had 2 offspring, and by the time they gave birth to the second one, Briggs had achieved a high standing within his profession. And he was like, maybe I want to retire, maybe I want to spend time at home with my offspring. But, no. That didn't happen. The original plan was to go into business with his brother, Oliver, because he had also gotten a little tired of wandering around. But it didn't happen. They were like, let's invest in a ship instead. Oliver invested in Julia A. Halleck and Benjamin in the Mary Celeste. Now supplies on board the Mary Celeste were set to last for 6 months. And there was like some really luxurious items as well. Talking like a sewing machine, a piano. Historians and commentators generally agree that to abandon such a worthy ship, something crazy or alarming must have happened. But the last entry on the ship's daily log reveals nothing unusual, and inside the ship, everything's been in order. Theories over the years have included mutiny, pirate attack, even a giant octopus or sea monster. But the cause behind this ghost ship remains unsolved. Now if you want to talk about the origins of the ship, the Mary Celeste was built in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, and launched under British registration as Amazon in 1861. It was constructed of locally felled timber with 2 masts and was rigged and was carvel built, the hull planking flush rather than overlapping. She was transferred to American ownership and registration in 1868, and that's when she got her new name. After that, she sailed uneventfully until the 1872 voyage. At the salvage hearings following her recovery, the court's officers considered a lot of possibilities of foul play. But no convincing evidence supported any of the theories. The inconclusive nature of the hearings fostered continued speculation as to what had happened to the ship's occupants. Like, there's been a lot of theories, folks. I know I talked about the obvious ones already, but it was like, oh, maybe the booze fumes from the cargo did something. Maybe there was a submarine earthquake. Maybe there was a giant squid. And our favorite, paranormal intervention. Now, the ship was found, so after the hearings, she continued on in service under new owners. But in 1885, her captain deliberately wrecked her off of the coast of Haiti as part of an attempted insurance fraud. But the story of the abandonment, well, it lives on, because we still don't know what happened. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a story about it. Like, it's pretty famous.
Number 5. The Pyramids and the Sphinx. Famed for giving out riddles to passers-by and would-be kings and keeping even more secrets for itself, the Sphinx and the Great Pyramids of Giza aren't just one of the best tourist destinations in the world, they're a source of never-ending speculation. Were they crafted by aliens? Are there hidden secrets lying within the Sphinx that we don't know about? Almost certainly. Let's dissect them a bit. So the Sphinx, if you haven't heard of it, this is your first time hearing about it. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world or something, but this might be the first time. It's a massive limestone statue with a lion's body, and let's be real, it's a nice one at that. And the head of a human. Was it always a human's face? There's some speculation and discussion about that. Some researchers have proposed that originally the Sphinx was a monument to the jackal god Anubis, and that his face was refitted at some point in the image of Amenhotep II, a pharaoh from around that era. Now the purpose and origin remains a point of contention to Egyptologists. What was the Sphinx built for? Is it a tomb? A monument? Just something to take photos of? Some people even speculated that the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. A tomb? A monument? Just something to do? Researchers too have speculated that perhaps the Sphinx is older than Egypt even. Erosion pattern on the Sphinx's body appear consistent with water erosion rather than wind erosion, raising all sorts of questions about the climate and geological history. Did Egypt used to be like a lot wetter? And that's just what puzzles people on the outside. The inside of the thing is a whole other can of worms. Some propose that there are unexplored passages or secret chambers containing wondrous treasures, ancient texts, sacred artifacts. I think the Master Sword might even be in there. Some people think there's proof of extraterrestrial life. It's a very widespread conspiracy theory that aliens were involved in the Sphinx and the pyramids and are very closely tied to ancient Egyptian culture. Some limited excavations around the Sphinx have been carried out, but because of the delicate nature of the monument, further digging is a bit challenging. You don't want to be the guy who ruined one of the 7 wonders of the world. They're gonna make fun of you forever if that happens. We could do a whole video on the mysteries behind the Sphinx, and I sincerely hope we do, because we are just scratching the surface of strange stuff going on there. But if you're looking for way more strange stuff, then you already know we have that in spades. We've got just about everything freaky you can think of. We've done a video or 2 on it. So hit subscribe. Please hit that little bell as well so you make sure to get our videos up to date. Don't miss a single scream, but Do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more unsolved mysteries for you coming up right now. Number 4, the Voynich manuscript. The manuscript is one of my personal favorite unsolved mysteries out there, just for how sheer little we know about it. We have nothing. It's kind of a choose your own adventure for mysteries. Is it aliens? Demons? A really convoluted historical prank? If you don't know, the Voynich manuscript is a strange document written in a handwritten text filled with bizarre illustrations. No one's been able to make sense of it, primarily because it's written in a language that has never been seen elsewhere in human history. It was named after Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish antiquarian who purchased it in 1912, although its ownership has passed through many hands. So what was it written for, and by who? These are the questions we've been asking, and we're probably going to keep asking over and over. The manuscript is about 240 pages, containing illustrations of plants, astronomical diagrams, humanoid figures, and other strange objects. Despite countless attempts by cryptographers, no one's been able to crack the code just yet. Some speculation has been made that it could be a biology textbook in an encoded language. Some people think it could be the scrawlings of a brilliant alchemist, magic and spell casting we couldn't possibly hope to understand. Some say it's from a forgotten civilization, while others have said maybe it's all just a load of nonsense and is just made by someone who had too much time on their hands and a vengeance against historians who wanted to prank them for centuries. The book is thought to have come from anywhere between the 15th century and the 17th century. We don't even know when this thing was written. Like I said, we know next to nothing about it. Now, if you're feeling clever and inspired, you can find a PDF of the Voynich manuscript as a free download pretty easily. Who knows? You might be the one to finally crack this case. But hey, don't be frustrated if you end up falling down a conspiracy rabbit hole many before you have tried. I looked through a few of these pages and it took me 30 seconds before I was looking like Charlie from Always Sunny at the conspiracy wall, all that red tape and stuff. Number 3, the Yonaguni monument. You've heard of the lost city of Atlantis, surely. Of course you have. It's one of the best Disney movies you forgot about. That's a story for a whole other video. Well, what if it wasn't the only lost underwater city out there? Have you ever heard of the Yonaguni monument? The Yonaguni monument has sometimes been called Japan's Atlantis, and it refers to a strange, eerie underwater rock formation just off the coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan that has had people scratching their heads for years. It's a massive structure consisting of several flat rock slabs arranged in a way that seems like an intelligent life put it together. Now, some people say that this structure could be completely natural, resulting from years of erosion and tectonic activity. Certainly, stranger things have happened, and it wouldn't be completely impossible for something to form this way, but the way it exists now, the way it sits, it seems deliberately carved out, and it seems like it was an important structure to someone. Perhaps a monument, a temple, some sign of a lost city, hence the Atlantis comparisons. Is it possible this was evidence of a lost civilization buried beneath the ocean waves, forever forgotten to history? The monument being completely submerged has been fuel for the fire of speculation. Was it always underwater? Did it end up there over time? Did the water raise around it? Did the land used to look significantly different? It makes it pretty difficult to study as well, making it just that little bit more elusive, as if it wasn't mysterious enough as is. But let's be real, it was probably aliens. It was almost certainly aliens. Number 2, the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle. Now there's an exquisite ancient mystery, one of the certified classics, something that's eluded us for years and will probably continue to do so. It's been referred to before as the Devil's Triangle, and it's host to all manner of mysterious incidents and unexplained phenomena. One of the more infamous incidents linked to the Bermuda Triangle is the disappearance of Flight 19 in December 1945. 5 Navy bombers vanished during a routine training mission alongside 14 crew members. Gone. Zilch. There was an extensive search effort, but nothing was ever found. Not so much as a bolt off the hull, a boot fished up, a hat, nothing. It was as if they were swallowed up by the void. Naturally, people went a bit wild with theories on this one. Anything from aliens, electromagnetic anomalies, alternate realities, no clipping into the back room. You know, pretty serious academic stuff. But it's bizarre. Another particularly good Bermuda baffler for you is the case of the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, the 542-foot long cargo ship carrying over 300 crew members vanished. during its voyage from Barbados. No wreckage, no survivors ever found. Certainly you would think a ship that big with that many people would leave behind a little bit of evidence, right? What happened? Were they swallowed up by the very seas themselves, pulled to Davy Jones's locker by the Kraken? Or are they somewhere we can't reach them, in a place between worlds and time? The region is known for all sorts of weird stuff too, involving electronic malfunctions and compass deviations. It makes it seem like there is just something bad in the air out there. Maybe just bad vibes? Certainly seems that way. And number 1, the Dorset mass grave. Oh, this one is a doozy, and it is one of the scariest and most confusing archaeological discoveries ever found. Let me ask you, what's more fun than a barrel of monkeys? A barrel of Vikings? Well, how about a mass grave full of headless Viking bodies? No? Well, you and I find different things fun, I suppose. Way back in the yesteryear of 2008, a group of archaeologists were on a fairly routine digging operation in Dorset, a quaint little seaside town in England. They were supervising a digging operation to improve local roads and were on set to see if there was anything of note to find, you know, if they came across an old coin or an old arrowhead or something you could stuff in a museum case. For the first few days of the job, there wasn't anything particularly noteworthy discovered until they came across the mass pile of 54 entangled Viking corpses, all missing their heads. I guess they thought that was probably kind of interesting. If it was just a bunch of headless Viking bodies, that'd be one thing. But the mass grave was wrapped in confusing details. Their skulls were missing, but as well their rib cages, arms, and leg bones were all scattered around, this is disgusting, surrounded by discarded teeth. No clothes or weaponry was recovered. So what in the Allfather's name happened here? Because absolutely nothing I can imagine is pleasant. Sounds like Vikings opened up a portal to hell, went really wild with it. The teeth found around the grave had all been filed down neatly, which is very interesting. Now, it goes without saying that Viking dental surgery could not have been painless, meaning the process had to be excruciating, suggesting it was either done by a very careful tormentor or done to themselves to intimidate their opponents to show just how gritty they are. I actually don't know which of those two are preferable. They actually both sound pretty horrible. Now, as good as my theory about a bunch of Vikings opening up a portal to hell and being offered as a sacrifice is, archaeologists had some different ideas. They theorized that by looking at the wound patterns on the ribs and torso, they were surgical precise blows, which wasn't really the kind of thing you'd expect from a rabid Viking warrior flailing around a sword in a brawl. The archaeologists thought that these men were either offered up as part of a horrifyingly sadistic ritual, or it was a big time mass sentencing where everybody was sentenced to the death. Explains too where all the weapons and gear had gone. These men had been brought here from somewhere else and then left here for a long time. We might never know the truth behind the Dorset mass grave, and I'm gonna be honest, that might be fine with me. Some secrets are better left buried. Anyone else feel though that all those Viking skeletons, that might be like the world's most terrifying puzzle to put all that together? Morbid thought, and that's something to end the video on.
How about we kick off today with the origins of the day? Way back before it was known as such. So way back when, Romans celebrated the feast of Lupercalia from February 13th to the 15th every year. The men would sacrifice a goat and a dog, and then lash women with the hides of the animals they had just slain. Apparently the Roman romantics were usually very intoxicated and nude, according to experts. Young women would line up for the men to thrash them, under the belief that this would make them fertile. The ancient Romans may also be responsible for the name of our modern day of love. Emperor Claudius II executed 2 men, both named Valentine, on February 14th on different years in the 3rd century. Their martyrdom was honored by the Catholic Church with the celebration of St. Valentine's Day. So as the holiday spread, it evolved. Pope Julius I muddled things in the 5th century by combining St. Valentine's Day with Lupercalia to expel the pagan rituals. By the way, Lupercalia is mentioned in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar when Mark Antony is told by Caesar to thrash his wife in the hope that she will become fertile. Alright, I think I'm getting a little muddled. Let me make things clear before we keep moving on. I'm personally very aware that Lupercalia and Valentine's Day are 2 separate holidays, but while Lupercalia can and does exist without the second, Valentine's Day doesn't exist without the other. Sadly, that's the case with a lot of the long-standing pagan holidays ways that Christianity has been able to warp and bastardize. So this new festival was more of a theatrical interpretation of what it had once been. Experts have mentioned that it was a little more of a boozy revel, but the Christians put clothes back on it. Thankfully, it didn't stop it from being a day of fertility and love. Around the same time, there was another celebration, Gallatin's Day. This meant lover of women, and was likely confused with St. Valentine's Day at some point since they sound so familiar. So as the years went on, the holiday grew sweeter. Folks like Shakespeare romanticized it in their work, and it gained popularity throughout Britain and the rest of Europe. Handmade paper cards became the tokens du jour in the Middle Ages, and eventually the tradition made its way to the New World. The Industrial Revolution ushered in factory-made cards in the 19th century, and in 1913, Hallmark Cards of Kansas City began mass-producing Valentines, and February has not been the same ever since. I just like the pink aesthetic. It's my favorite color. Here's another tradition that originated from Lupercalia, drawing a partner for the day. Alright folks, picture this. It's the 17th century, and you're at this Valentine's Day party. Everybody's all dressed up, we're all having a good time, but then they bring out this vessel, this bowl, think of it like an ancient artifact. And inside there's slips of paper with people's names on it. And when you draw somebody's name, you're stuck with them for the whole evening. No thanks. Under these rules, you could end up spending Valentine's Day with somebody you barely know, or somebody you can't stand. Imagine being paired up with that annoying guy that you don't like, or, I don't know, your ex's friend. No thanks, I'd rather spend the night binge watching rom-coms with my stuffed animals and a candy tray. And this whole thing was just a weird matchmaking scheme. If a guy drew a girl's name, he'd usually stick with her instead of the girl who picked his name. Oh yeah, everybody drew an individual name, and they didn't always match up. So then, he's gonna go off with who he wants, and then we're dealing with the aftermath. I get that it was supposed to be fun and all, but it sounds like a recipe for disaster. Imagine being stuck without a partner? I'm getting major picked last for school projects vibes. Also, apparently, people would wear these slips of paper with their partner's names on them for days afterwards. So you'd be walking around with random guy's name pinned to your shirt. Look, if you really liked them, sure, it's cute, it's fun, it's oh my god, look. But if not, it's yeah, I got Brad. Great. And who knows, maybe some of these forced pairings actually ended up turning into something real, but I'm guessing most of them were just awkward encounters that everybody wanted to forget. So yeah, as cute as Valentine's Day can be with all the chocolates and the flowers, maybe we should leave the lottery thing in the past, where it belongs. I'll take the single Pringle lifestyle over that any day. Okay, picky eaters, this next one might be icky for you. I know with my ADHD, there are just certain things I can't handle, and this might just take the cake today for the grossest thing. So get this, if you were hoping for a proposal on this very special day, or you wanted to strengthen your marriage, there was this wild solution that people thought was gonna work. Brace yourselves, folks. Back in medieval times, folks had this thing called love potions. And it wasn't like some cute little concoction you'd see in a fairy tale, no fairy godmother here with a cute little pink bottle. These potions were like something out of a modern day horror movie. People would mix together all these random ingredients, and they're like, hey, this is gonna mess with my body's psyche, make me fall head over heels in love, or you're gonna fall in love with me. Yeah, it sounds a little sketchy, right? How about we check out one from the 16th century together? You ready, folks? It involves mashing up earthworms with leeks, and then get this, eating the whole disgusting mess. I'm sorry, who in their right mind thought that would be a good idea? I get they were desperate for love back then, and they still are now, but I draw the line at eating earthworms. Can you even imagine trying to serve that to somebody you like? Hey babe, I made you a special Valentine's Day dinner. It's earthworm and leek mush. Bon appetit. Yeah, I think that's gonna send anybody running for the hills, not professing their undying love. I'll stick to making my famous double chocolate cookies, or maybe molasses cookies, or chocolate caramel shortbread. We got options. Also, apparently there were some other really icky ingredients in these love potions. We're talking garlic, onions, musk, no thank you, that's stinky. I don't care how much you love somebody, there's no way I'm drinking or eating any kind of concoction that's no. So yeah, as much as I love a good romance, I'll just stick to modern day love rituals. Sending cute texts, going on dates, I've heard about those. Maybe indulging in some chocolate covered strawberries. Because let's face it, nothing says I love you like a box of chocolates. Not a potion made of earthworms. Alright, we're moving on before I start yakking on camera. And I don't want to mess up my very cute Valentine's Day makeup. I have Galentine's plans later. Is anybody out there a fan of Married at First Sight? Personally, I'm not for a myriad of reasons. For starters, I'm not a big reality TV fan, and the thought of marrying somebody without knowing them first? Between you and me, I have a really bad habit of getting bored with romantic partners, so I can't imagine settling down on a whim. Heck, I can't even imagine settling down or even dating with my current lifestyle. So apparently there was this whole belief back in the day that on Valentine's Day, women would fall head over heels for the first guy they laid eyes on, to the point where they had to marry them. And okay, I'm a Shakespeare girly. He totally played into this in Midsummer's Night Dream. I love talking about this play. It's my favorite work. I've actually been very lucky. I've been in 2 different productions of it in my lifetime. So you know that part where Queen Titania wakes up and she falls madly in love with the guy with the donkey head? Yes, Oberon cursed her to fall in love with Bottom, but a trope is a trope. So apparently that was based on some real life Valentine's folklore. Can you even imagine waking up and finding yourself swooning over some random random dude with a donkey head? Yeah, no thanks, I'll pass. And apparently there's also a British rhyme that goes something like, when I go out, the first swain I see, in spite of fortune shall my true love be. Yeah, I don't think my true love is gonna magically appear just because I happen to lock eyes with somebody on the street. Also, what if the first person you see is like not your type? Are you just supposed to suck it up and settle? Also, because this is all like, oh, I'm gonna fall in love with a guy, it's a little too heteronormative for my liking. There's also this gem from Samuel Pepys' diary in 1662. So apparently his wife was so freaked out about this whole falling in love thing that she walked around on Valentine's Day with her hands over her eyes. Yeah, some people will call those extreme measures, but like, I get it. It's also just some next level paranoia. So yeah, as aesthetically cute as Valentine's Day can be, as you see, I like all the hearts. Maybe we should leave this tradition in the past where it belongs. Like, I'll spend the day with somebody I actually know and like. Thanks. I think it might be best if I end today with something a little more silly and whimsical, a little less horrifying. Is anybody out there a fan of turnips? Not for me, but that might be because I associate it with steamed veggies from dinners growing up, and those were not it. Look, my mother was very fond of using a steamer, and I don't know if our family just kept striking out with lemons, or if she didn't know how to use the damn things, but if you eat enough like too mushy or slightly too hard warm veggies, you never want to look at warmed veggies ever again. Sorry, I know, back on topic I go. So get this. Back in the day when folks threw a Valentine's Day party, it was like the Met Gala of medieval times. Everyone would show up dressed to the nines, having a good time. But here's where it gets a little weird. They would pin these things called tokens to their clothes, which were basically symbols of love. You know, like the infinity sign or cheesy mottos. Like, okay, I guess it's cute, but it's a little much. Don't worry. That's not my point here. There were these love lanterns everywhere. So you'd think, you know, lanterns, okay, soft, romantic, maybe kind of gothic, right? Not so much. These bad boys were made out of hollowed out turnips with candles shoved inside. Because, you know, nothing says let's celebrate our love like a flaming root vegetable. I'm sorry, just like picture this. Walking into a room filled with turnip lanterns flickering in the dim light. For me, that sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. And don't even get me started on the smell. Like, I bet the whole place reeked of like burnt vegetable wax. Not exactly the most romantic ambiance if you ask me. So yeah, as much as I love a good themed party, I think I'll pass on the whole Middle Ages Valentine's Day vibe.